Hello, good morning, all of you. Welcome back to Appreciating Literature. Today, we are going to see another short story which is titled The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. I think most of you must have studied this in your school. It used to be there in the syllabus. It's a very simple story. But here we are going to see more elaborately about the author, and then we will go straight to the story. This is Oscar Wilde. He was born in 1854 and died in 1900. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin on 16 October 1854 to Sir William Wilde and his wife Jane. Oscar's mother, Lady Jane Francesca Wilde, was a successful poet and journalist. So his mother was also a writer, poet and also journalist. She wrote patriotic Irish verse under the pseudonym Speranza. Oscar's father, Sir William Wilde, was a leading ear and eye surgeon, a renowned philanthropist and gifted writer who wrote books on archaeology and folklore. So his father was a surgeon and he also used to write. Oscar had an elder brother Willie and a younger sister Isola Francesca, who died at the early age of 10. So somehow writing was in his family, so maybe it was easy for him to become a writer. He was educated at Portora Royal School, Trinity College Dublin, and Magdalen College Oxford. While at Oxford, he became involved in the aesthetic movement and became an advocate for art's sake, or l'art pour l'art, as in French. While at Magdalen, he won the 1878 Newdigate Prize for his poem Ravenna. So he had a very good education from Oxford University and all that. After he graduated, he moved to Chelsea in London to establish a literary career. In 1881, he published his first collection of poetry, poems that received mixed reviews by critics. He worked as an art reviewer, lectured in the United States and Canada, and lived in Paris. He also lectured in Britain and Ireland. So he had a career in different universities as a lecturer, and he used to go to different countries like US, Canada, Paris, and then later he came back to Britain and Ireland. In 1888, he published The Happy Prince and Other Tales, fairy stories written for his two sons. So this was not just a single story, it was a collection of tales, mostly like fairy tales, which was written for his two sons. His first and only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, was published in 1891 and received quite a negative response. So he had written only just one novel, and that was not received well with the public. This had much to do with the novel's homoerotic overtones, which caused something of a sensation amongst Victorian critics. And not that the novel itself was bad, but because of its content, which had homosexual implications. During those days, the people or the society was very conservative, orthodox, so they were not able to accept this kind of shocking ideas. In 1891, Wilde began an affair with Lord Alfred Douglas, nicknamed Bossy, who became both the love of his life and his downfall. So you find towards the end of his life, he is making a mess of his life. He had some homosexual relationship, which landed him in prison and all that. He was imprisoned. That is a sad story about him. Wilde's marriage ended in 1893. So, as a consequence of all this, he was not able to lead a good married life. Wilde's greatest talent was for writing plays. So, he was also interested in writing plays. His first successful play, Lady Windermere's Fan, opened in February 1892. So, that was his first successful play. He produced a string of extremely popular comedies, including A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, and The Importance of Being Earnest. So, these are some of his popular comedies. These plays were all highly acclaimed and firmly established Oscar as a playwright. He died of cerebral meningitis on November 30, 1900, penniless in a cheap Paris hotel. So, he died a very miserable death. Maybe nobody was there to look after him because his marriage failed. He was imprisoned because of that case, and he had no money and all that. So, that was a terrible death for a great writer like him. Now we go to the story, The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of the Happy Prince. So the story opens with the statue of the Happy Prince, which is placed on a tall column. Column means like a pedestal. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. So he was a prince, so naturally they made this statue covered with gold. For eyes he had two bright sapphires, precious stones. Sapphires means Indrajalam. And a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. The handle of the sword had a red ruby. He was very much admired indeed. So everyone who looked at his statue appreciated, admired the beauty of the statue. He is as beautiful as a weathercock. I think you must have seen weathercocks, at least in some pictures. It has the shape of a cock which will be turning around according to the wind and all that. Remarked one of the town councillors who wished to gain a reputation for having artistic taste. So he remarked that he looked like a weathercock, only not quite so useful. So weathercock is very useful, but the statue is not useful. That's what he commented, fearing lest people should think him unpractical, which he really was not. So he was a person who would always think about what other people would think about him. That's why he said this negative remark about the statue. Why can't you be like the Happy Prince? Asked a sensible mother of her little boy who was crying for the moon. So even a mother who used to comfort the little boy used to ask this question, why can't you be happy like the Happy Prince? The Happy Prince never dreams of crying for anything. I am glad there is someone in the world who is quite happy, muttered a disappointed man as he gazed at the wonderful statue. So this statue became the talk of the town. Everyone appreciated it, and they thought the prince was really happy, very fortunate. He looks just like an angel, said the charity children as they came out of the cathedral in their bright scarlet cloaks and their clean white pinafores. So charity children means children who are brought up in a kind of orphanage. So they looked at this Happy Prince and they said he looks like an angel. How do you know? Said the mathematical master. You have never seen one. Ah, but we have in our dreams, answered the children. And the mathematical master frowned and looked very severe, for he did not approve of children dreaming. So when the children told the teacher that they had seen angels in their dreams, he was not very happy with that answer. One night there flew over the city a little swallow. Swallow is a little bird. His friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks before, but he had stayed behind, for he was in love with the most beautiful reed. So this swallow, who had stayed back while all his friends had gone to Egypt, the reason was that he had fallen in love with a beautiful reed. Reed is a plant which you find near the rivers, streams and all that, a water plant. He had met her early in the spring as he was flying down the river after a big yellow moth, and had been so attracted by her slender waist that he had stopped to talk to her. So as he was running after or chasing a moth, suddenly he came to meet this beautiful reed, and then he started falling in love with this reed. Shall I love you? Said the swallow, who would like to come to the point at once. And the reed made him a low bow. So he did not waste any time. He immediately came to the point and asked the reed whether he could love her. And of course, the reed bent low in agreement. So he flew around and round her, touching the water with his wings and making silver ripples. So he was so happy, he started flying around, touching the water with his wings and making ripples and all that. This was his courtship, and it lasted all through the summer. So here courtship means romance. It is a ridiculous attachment, twittered the other swallows. So for the other swallows, it was something very strange. They couldn't understand what kind of relationship was that. A bird loving a reed. She has no money and far too many relations. Yes, this is a poor girl. She has too many relations and all that. And indeed, the river was quite full of reeds. There are so many plants there. That's why other birds told that she has so many relations. Then, when the autumn came, they all flew away. That means all the other birds flew away to Egypt. After they had gone, he felt lonely and began to tire of his lady love. So, naturally, after some time, he got fed up with this love. She has no conversation, so she doesn't talk, only moves around in the wind. And I am afraid that she is a coquette. Coquette means one who is flirting with everybody. Or she is always flirting with the wind. Yes. So the swallow started suspecting the reed's sincerity. And certainly, whenever the wind blew, the reed made the most graceful curtsies. So she was always dancing in the wind. So the swallow thought that this reed is in love with the wind and all that. I admit that she is domestic, he continued. Domestic here means she is attached to her home. She doesn't like to leave her home. But I love traveling, and my wife consequently should love traveling also. So I am a kind of nomad who is always moving from one place to another, traveling. So my wife also should be like that. Should not be like the reed. Will you come away with me? He said finally to her. But the reed shook her head. She was so attached to her home. So the reed was not willing to go with the swallow. You have been trifling with me, he cried. I am off to the pyramids. Goodbye. And he flew away. So he thought that she was not very serious about his love. Trifling means not taking seriously, playing with. So he said goodbye to the reed and flew away to the pyramids. All day long he flew, and at night time he arrived at the city. Where shall I put up? So now the swallow is searching for a place to stay. I hope the town has made preparations. So he thought maybe the town has some place for him. Then he saw the statue on the tall column. Yes, suddenly caught the sight of this beautiful statue on the pedestal. I will put up there, he cried. It is a fine position with plenty of fresh air. So he liked that place on top of that column near that statue. So he alighted just between the feet of the happy prince. So he came down and then settled there between the feet of the happy prince, the statue. I have a golden bedroom, he said softly to himself as he looked around, and he prepared to go to sleep. So when he looked up, he saw that the statue was full of gold plated. So he was very happy to have a golden bedroom, and he prepared to go to sleep. But just as he was putting his head under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him. Suddenly something strange happened. A drop of water fell on him. What a curious thing, he cried. There is not a single cloud in the sky. The stars are quite clear and bright, and yet it is raining. So the swallow could not understand why it is raining. At least he thought it was raining when the water drop fell on him, and he was not able to see any cloud. The climate in the north of Europe is really dreadful. So he thought, the weather is very unpredictable. The reed used to like the rain, but that was merely her selfishness. So now she is blaming the reed for being selfish and all that. Then another drop fell. So second drop of water fell on him. What is the use of a statue if it cannot keep the rain off? He said. So he sat under the statue thinking that it has a very good shelter. But now he realized that it is not so safe. I must look for a good chimney pot, and he determined to flew away. So he thought of going to a safer place, maybe a chimney pot. But before he had opened his wings, a third drop fell, and he looked up and saw, what did he see? So the third drop fell on him, and suddenly he looked up. Let's see what he saw. The eyes of the happy prince were filled with tears, and tears were running down his golden cheeks. His face was so beautiful in the moonlight that the little swallow was filled with pity. Now the swallow realized the source of that water drops. It was from the eyes of the happy prince. Actually, the happy prince's eyes were filled with tears. So the swallow is feeling pity and sympathy towards the happy prince. Who are you? He said. I am the happy prince. Why are you weeping then? Asked the swallow. You have quite drenched me, so you have quite made me wet. Why are you crying? When I was alive and had a human heart, answered the statue, I did not know what tears were, for I lived in the palace Sans Souci, where sorrow is not allowed to enter. So now the happy prince is telling his story. When I was alive, when I had a human heart, I did not know what sorrow was, because he lived in a place where there was no sorrow. Palace of Sans Souci. Sans Souci is a French word which means without any sorrow or sadness. In the daytime, I played with my companions in the garden, and in the evening, I led the dance in the great hall. So, all the time in the palace, he was enjoying his time. He had a lot of friends to play and dance. Round the garden ran a very lofty wall, but I never cared to ask what lay beyond it. Everything about me was so beautiful. So, his palace was covered with very tall walls, and he was not able to see what was happening outside those walls or the palace. My courtiers called me the happy prince, and happy indeed I was, if pleasure be happiness. So everybody in the palace called me the happy prince. So he enjoyed his life as a prince. So I lived, and so I died. So there's nothing else in his life, only happiness, enjoyment and play. And now that I am dead, they have set me up here so high that I can see all the ugliness and all the misery of my city. And though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep. So now that I am a statue and I am put up so high, I can see whatever is happening around me, all the bad things, sad things, dirty things that is happening in the city. So even though my heart is made of lead, I can still feel. So I feel so sad and I cannot but weep or cry. What, is he not solid gold? Said the swallow to himself. So you look full of gold. He was too polite to make any personal remarks out aloud. So he did not say that loud. Far away, continued the statue in a low musical voice. Far away in a little street, there is a poor house. One of the windows is open, and through it I can see a woman seated at a table. So here the happy prince is narrating what he is able to see. He is telling that far away in a small street there is a poor house and a woman is seated at a table. Her face is thin and worn, a poor woman, not having enough food and all that. And she has coarse red hands, very rough, all pricked by the needle. She is stitching something, for she is a seamstress. Seamstress means a tailor. She is embroidering passion flowers on a satin gown for the loveliest of the queen's maids of honor to wear at the next court ball. So she is preparing that gown for the queen's ladies for the dance day. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. So this woman's boy is there sick. He has a fever and is asking for oranges. His mother has nothing to give him but river water. So he is crying. So this is a picture of misery that the happy prince is able to see from his pedestal. You find this child boy who is sick, and the mother is not able to give him anything but water from the river. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? My feet are fastened to this pedestal and I cannot move. So now the prince is asking the swallow to do him a favor. He is asking the swallow to remove that ruby, that precious stone from the sword hilt, because he is not able to move. I am waited for in Egypt, said the swallow. Yes, my friends are waiting there. I have to hurry in Egypt. My friends are flying up and down the Nile and talking to the large lotus flowers. So here he is telling the prince what his friends are enjoying there, flying up and down the river Nile and all that. Soon they will be going to sleep in the tomb of the great king. Tomb of the great king is the pyramid. The king is there himself in his painted coffin. He is wrapped in yellow linen and embalmed with spices. Around his neck is a chain of pale green jade, and his hands are like withered leaves. So he is talking about the mummies in the pyramids. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, will you not stay with me for one night and be my messenger? So the happy prince is asking the swallow to stay at least one night, in order to help the people in his city. The boy is so thirsty and the mother so sad. I don't think I like boys, answered the swallow. So when the happy prince is telling about the misery and pain, the sickness of the boy, and the mother who needs help, and the swallow is telling, I don't like boys, and he has got reasons for that. Last summer when I was staying on the river, there were two rude boys, the miller's sons, who were always throwing stones at me. They never hit me, of course. We swallows fly far too well for that. And besides, I come of a family famous for its agility, but still it is a mark of disrespect. So the swallow is narrating one of his painful memories when two boys threw stones at him, but it did not hit him, of course, because he was very fast in flying, expert in flying and all that. But the swallow is thinking that it was a mark of disrespect. But the happy prince looked so sad that the little swallow was sorry. It is very cold here, he said, but I will stay with you for one night and be your messenger. So at the end, the swallow is agreeing to stay just one night. Thank you, little swallow, said the prince. So the swallow picked out the great ruby from the prince's sword and flew away with it in his beak over the roofs of the town. So the swallow removed that ruby from the sword and then took it to the roof or the house of that mother and the boy. He passed by the cathedral tower where the white marble angels were sculptured. He passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. A beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. So on the way, the swallow is able to see so many rich sights like cathedral, then a palace where he could hear the sound of dancing and all that, then lovers enjoying themselves. How wonderful the stars are, he said to her, the lover boy, and how wonderful is the power of love. I hope my dress will be ready in time for the state ball, she answered. So the woman is actually preparing that dress for these people in the palace. I have ordered partial flowers to be embroidered on it, but the seamstresses are so lazy. So this queen's lady is talking about her dress being prepared and blaming them for being lazy or being late. He passed over the river and saw the lanterns hanging to the masts of the ships. He passed over the ghetto and saw the old Jews bargaining with each other and weighing out money in copper scales. At last, he came to the poor house and looked in. So after the palace, the swallow is passing over the ghetto. Ghetto is the poor people's place, and where he saw merchants, business people and all that, bargaining and all that. So at the end he came to that woman's house. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed and the mother had fallen asleep. She was so tired. In he hopped and laid the great ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. So the mother was sleeping and the boy was of course restless, and the swallow is placing the ruby close to that woman's thimble. Thimble is the cap used on the fingers for stitching and all that. Finger cap like. It's made of metal, of course. Then he flew gently around the bed, fanning the boy's forehead with his wings. How cool I feel, said the boy. I must be getting better. And he sank into a delicious slumber. So meanwhile, the swallow did not forget to cool off the boy who was suffering from fever. So after fanning the boy and putting him to sleep, delicious means sweet, slumber means sleep, the swallow flew back. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince and told him what he had done. It is curious, he remarked, but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold. So it is winter, and after flying for some time, the swallow is feeling very warm, though the climate is very cold. That's because you have done a good action, said the prince. So you are feeling warm because you have done something good. And the little swallow began to think, and then he fell asleep. Thinking always made him sleepy. Yes. So with that we have come to the end of the first part. We will continue this story in the next class. Until then, it is goodbye. Thank you.